All right, so part 2 of Alma 30, we're going to talk about the responses of different people to Korihor. And so there's 3 main, I guess 4 responses to Korihor, and we're just going to kind of pull out a principle or 2 from these. And so the first people that we are introduced to, remember Ammon? Remember his converts, King Lamoni and his kingdom. So these were the people that lived now in the land of Jershon. These are Lamanites. And Korihor comes into their land, and I love this. This is verse 20. Listen to the response of these believers, recent converts. But behold, they were more wise than many of the Nephites, for they took him and bound him and carried him before Ammon. They didn't even give him a chance to teach what he was teaching. The Nephites and the people of Zarahemla were allowing this man to teach them. They were intrigued by his teachings. And I'm not saying that's bad, but I love the people of Jershon. They didn't even give him a chance.
I love how it says they were more wise, because wisdom, I've said this before, is acting upon the knowledge.
Yeah.
I feel like that's kind of my definition of it, is you know something, but wisdom, being wise, is acting upon it. So they acted. They took him and bound him. They didn't just sit there passively. They did something about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a cool thing. There's lots of anti-literature, literature that is against the teachings of the church, and I will say that there are times when I'm interested in looking at some of those teachings, and I have learned that in many cases it's sometimes better to just not give way to some of those teachings. They're designed to destroy your faith. They're designed to destroy you as a person and your beliefs, and sometimes it's good to just be wise like unto the people of Ammon and just not give in. And you see that as well. This is why I said there's 4. I wouldn't want to spend too much time, but he also goes to the land of Gideon. And all we learn here is that in this verse 21, and here he did not have much success. And they did something similar to the people of Ammon and the people of Jershon, and they took him and bound him and carried him before the high priest. Yeah. And so out of the mouth of 2 witnesses, right, we see that the truth will be restored. We have 2 examples of people that he comes into the city and they don't give in. They don't give in to the teachings of Korihor. So now we have the high priest, and his name is, how do you pronounce it? It's Giddonah? I believe it's Giddonah. And so Giddonah, he responds in an interesting way, right? So he is the high priest and also the chief judge of the land. And he starts asking questions to Korihor. Verse 22. Why do you go about perverting the ways of the Lord? Why do you teach this people that there is no Christ, to interrupt their rejoicings? Why do you speak against all the prophecies of the holy prophets? And I think that's I like that response. I feel like it's a faithful response when he just kind of puts Korihor in his place and says, like, why are you doing this? Yeah. What's your purpose? Going around to destroy the rejoicings of this people? What do you think about the response of Giddonah?
Well, I always like you say, the why of it, because I feel like knowing the why behind everything is what helps us to be able to act the way we should. Yeah. And to change. And so getting down to their why, even if they're acting the wrong way, can help bring about change or greater light and greater understanding.
It's not the best example, but right now one of the hot topics in our world today is to wear a mask or not to wear a mask. We're all going through this similar experience with COVID-19, and we're not going to get political, we're not going to get into the reasons, but it's just sometimes we get so focused on an action or what we're doing, and we don't often ask why. And I think
either way.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the essence of it, when we seek to answer the whys, why are we doing these actions? It helps us to live our life better, but also to understand when people are trying to attack us, why are they doing it? Oh, this is how they see we should seek better protection for our health. And so I think if we focus on whys, we'll find ourselves being a little bit more united in life. But then after Korihor then gives his spiel he goes for about 6 verses, ranting on things that he does not like about the believers. Then the chief judge kind of sees there's no chance of this. He sees the hardness of his heart, and then he takes him and bounds him and takes him to Alma. And so, but we get that's kind of the response that they do. They just, it's not worth their time to argue with this man that's heart is so hard. He's not changing. And so let's just take him to the final person, which ends up being Alma. This is where we learn a lot, and we're 5 minutes into this, so this is where there's a lot of good principles here. And so I love Alma. Alma gives some great responses, and what I feel is an example of a bold member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so so let's dig into a couple of these principles of Alma. So the first thing is Alma is very put off by him attacking the leaders of the church, saying that they are utilizing the believers to glut themselves above them. And Alma just does not appreciate that and just quickly attacks that attacks that teaching, that false teaching, and says, you know that we do not make any money for the labor of what we do as leaders of the church. And he even says, I have never received so much as even one C9. How do you say that? C9 for my labor. And so we know that local leadership in this church, you are not paid.
Volunteer.
It is done by volunteer. It is done by accepting callings. And so I just think that's it's when you recognize false doctrine, Alma shows us that it is okay to stand for truth.
Yeah. And also say, I mean, you kind of said this. He says this a lot, but he says, you know. Like he's very bold and says, I know that you know this, you know.
Sometimes another thing I loved from Alma was sometimes when we argue and debate and get into these conversations with conflicting opinions, it's easy to just get off on tangents of things that don't matter. And so I love what Alma does here, verse 37. And then Alma said unto him, believest thou that there is a God? He gets back to a core fundamental principle that, I mean, you think of missionaries. When missionaries go out, what's the very first principle they teach? God. Do you remember? God is our loving Heavenly Father. And I love how he's like, okay, we've been talking about all these things. You've been arguing with the people and the believers. Do you believe that there is a God? Like, I love how he just asks a simple question to get Korihor to say a simple answer.
Well, and then, like you say, back to the basics, because everything builds upon those principles and those doctrines. And so if you can get back down to that, you can etch away at all the stuff that isn't true and doesn't matter and build from there. You know? And
that's exactly what Alma does, is he builds from there. He sets himself up to be able to give his testimony. So he follows up the response of Korihor by saying, I know there is a God, and also that Christ shall come. Very clear, very simple, very true statements that Alma teaches to Korihor. And then, let's see, what else does Alma do? He does a lot. So verse 40, and now what evidence have ye that there is no God, or that Christ cometh not? For Korihor to make so many statements and then saying, you have no truth, you haven't seen these things, Alma kind of turns it on him and says, what evidence do you have that there is not a God? You keep saying that we don't have evidence that there is a God. So he kind of turns it back on Korihor, which I think is a very strategic. What does it say about Ammon? Therefore Ammon caught he caught the king with like guile or something like that. He was able to catch him in his like statement. And you see that with Alma too, kind of using a little bit of strategy there and saying, what evidence do you have?
Flip it back.
You just keep pushing out doubt, but what are you standing on? What's the foundation that you're standing on right now?
Right, wow.
And then I think just kind of ending, Alma then says, well, I'm not going to leave you here with just my testimony. I'm going to give you witnesses. If you're going to say you don't believe, I'm going to show you witnesses. And he goes and he starts listing all the witnesses of Christ, talking about him being the creator, the planets, the motion, all these things, witnessing that there was a supreme creator. And he goes forth and just lists all of these things to Korihor. And it's really kind of cool to just see those witnesses.
And I can just imagine during this, like, it's very hard when people are debating with things to not get your feelings hurt and to not get riled up and everything. I just imagine Alma just being very calm and very cool about this. I mean, very passionate, but just very level-headed, about it, and keeping. Sure. I feel like the Spirit can really help us say the right things in the right way when we do have the Spirit with us and we are speaking truth.
That's such a good point, because it's like Alma does get pretty bold with Korihor, and that's not the response for every person. That's what Korihor needed, because we know that Korihor does change and admit that he was deceived.
He was wrong, yeah.
And so it's important to be close to the Spirit so that our responses are what you feel God wants you to say. When you're close with the Spirit, you're able to speak with more boldness because you know that's what God would have you do. So yeah, lots of Korihors in the world today, and I think there's great lessons we can learn from the scriptures. What else did you see from their responses?